Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and welcome to the Gideon's Promise Week Women's Thought Leadership Panel. Thank you so much to the Gathering Spot for hosting this event. I'm Mo Ivory, Professor of Law and Director of the Entertainment, Sports, and Media Law Certificate Program at Georgia State Law School, and I'll be your moderator for tonight. This is going to be a very special panel. In 3 days, it will be the 58th anniversary of the Supreme Court decision in Gideon versus Wainwright, when the promise of zealous public defense was first made available to all Americans. Every year, Gideon's Promise dedicates the week of this anniversary to celebrating this monumentous decision and renewing our commitment to fighting for equal justice. Gideon versus Wainwright was a major victory, but the fight is far from over. When we fail to uphold Gideon's promise, Black and brown communities are disproportionately silenced by inadequate legal representation. Not only is it Gideon's Promise Week, but we are also in the midst of celebrating Women's History Month. All too often, women are silenced and overlooked in every sector of American life. Like Clarence Earl Gideon standing before a judge all those years ago, and thousands of Black and brown Americans today, their voices are ignored. That is why we have intentionally convened this panel to amplify and platform the voices of strong Black women, women leaders in legal, in the nonprofit sector, and in corporate spaces. We cannot move forward if we leave our identities at the doorstep, and the intersection of gender and race is a key component to any discussion on justice and equity. We have some amazing panelists that you are really going to enjoy tonight, so I'm going to turn the floor over to them to introduce themselves one by one. Please bring the ladies in. I'd like to first introduce Raj Register. Raj, please introduce yourself so everybody knows exactly who you are.
Hi, Mo. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Raj Register. I am currently the head of global brand experiences at Ford Motor Company.
Thank you, Raj. Reverend Dr. Michelle Anne Simmons, welcome to this beautiful panel, and please introduce yourself.
Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Reverend Dr. Michelle Simmons, and I am the founder and executive director of Why Not Prosper, which is a transitional house for women coming from prison.
Oh, that's wonderful. And we have Andrenette Sullivan. Andrenette, please introduce yourself from the sunny state of Florida.
Hello, my name is Andrenette Sullivan. I am originally from Memphis, Tennessee, and I am an assistant public defender in Central Florida. It will be 5 years in May.
Wow. I'm so glad tonight we have such a varied group of women joining from different sectors as a public defender, nonprofit, and corporate spaces, so we really can have a robust conversation. And so I thought we would just start the first question off by saying that, you know, the criminal justice system impacts everybody, both professionally and personally. And I wanted to ask, how has that shaped you, either way, professionally or personally? And we'll start with Reverend Dr. Michelle Simmons.
Okay, well, thank you for choosing me first. How has the criminal justice system impacted me personally? Well, I'm a formerly incarcerated woman, woman. I did 6 years in the California Institution for Women. And so it has impacted me, I guess, since early childhood. I went to jail really early. And how it impacts me currently is every time I go to apply for certain funding, my background comes up. It impacts me in that way. It doesn't anymore because I got a pardon last year, right? From the governor. Yay. So it used to impact me just in every area, even down when I tried to get a student loan. Like I had to answer the question, have you been convicted of a felony? And I had to put yes there. You know, on foundation grants now, when they want to do a background on leadership, I have to answer that question. But I put yes, see attached pardon now. Praise the Lord. So it has impacted me greatly. That is personally. And professionally, you know, it continues to impact me because of the women I serve, right? They are as I look at the women I'm supporting and getting them to the next level of living in their life, they got all these barriers that they're facing, right? They can't get a job, same like my story was. They can't get their children back, or they terminate their rights without them knowing about it. You know, these are really heavy lifts, which have catapulted me into doing some advocacy work. So it has impacted me personally because I was who I serve, and it has impacted me you know, professionally, because now I'm on the front line fighting with the government and the politicians to change these policies and these laws so that it won't be as a hindrance as it possibly can be. So I'm just sitting at more tables that I can, you know, to try to recreate, if you would.
Right. And that personal experience obviously impacts the work you do every single day, since you understand from a personal perspective what that is to be going through that. Wow. Andrenette, you are a public defender, and so you are working in this the nature of what Gideon's Promise represents every day. How does the criminal justice system affect you both professionally and personally in that particular role?
Yes, so I am an alum of Gideon's Promise class of 2017. But the criminal justice system began to affect me at a young age. I went to elementary school in a community called Big Hampton, which is a urban impoverished area in Memphis, Tennessee. And since a young age, some of my friends, even in second grade, first grade, third grade, we knew that some of their family members were incarcerated. I have a couple of family members myself that have been in and out of the system. So on a personal level, I definitely have understood the collateral consequences of what it means when someone is not just arrested or convicted, but even accused of a crime. So fast forwarded to my professional work, every single day it affects me, because each day I'm trying to get the best result for my client. Sometimes I'm even more conscious that I don't want them to become a convicted felon, especially for younger clients, because they don't understand the true impact of having the word felon attached to their names. So in my sleep, in my social life, everything about the criminal legal system definitely affects me each day.
Wow, that's real. Raj, tell us about that same question and how that affects you, you know, in your life.
Yeah, I mean, listening to the other ladies, it definitely is a lot more relevant, you know, than I even realized on a personal level, because we've all been impacted in some way. We all know someone, or you may have a family member, or, you know, something like that. And so it's not anything that we can glaze over. You know, even as an executive at Ford, I have a horrific story. My husband got pulled over while I was in active labor and held at the side of the road at gunpoint. And so when you have scenarios like that, it doesn't matter what your walk of life is. It doesn't matter what type of vehicle you are in. Even though it was a company management vehicle, we still got pulled over. And like, my life didn't matter. His life didn't matter. My almost newborn son's life didn't matter. And so all walks of life are affected by this. And then when I think about how it relates to corporate America, you know, I think about some of the work that I've had an opportunity to do, like in our community, you know, thinking about Black women and Black men and selling vehicles, and not really understanding really until I got into the space and saw some of the research. There's a huge amount of distrust that our community has with corporations, with dealerships. And my goal was always to deliver something that not only impacted households, but our community. So educating our dealers, making sure that we do have programs in place to to allow people to come into dealers and they don't feel like they're discriminated against, but then also understanding like what the real story is. And so as Dr. Reverend Michelle talked about, there is issues like, you know, if 6% or 6 times the percent of our population is going to prison, there's a lot less people that can even qualify for loans. So how do we start to educate people on the cost of ownership of a vehicle when they can't even get, you know, credit to begin with? And so it's a cyclical effect that goes on. And so whenever I have a chance to impact the community, be able to highlight, you know, foundations and really give back, those are the areas as a company that we want to focus on, so we don't have those situations impacting really like mobility. Transportation is necessary. And so it's affected me in a lot of different ways. But I would say that, you know, as I continue to move through the system in corporate America, be very conscious of the things that I can do to try to impact and change how we do things, and ensure that any program that I'm associated with is not for the grandiose reason of just Ford Motor Company, but I'm also doing something to help educate and help.
If we've ever seen a time when we needed our faces and our opinions to be in the corporate space, it's now. And so we're grateful for your presence there to bring. I never even thought about the issue of like our community buying cars until you just said that in relationship to the legal system. You know, I just, the way you broke that down just made me think like, of course, right? That makes 100% sense. And so I'm glad that you shared that. I want to go to Andrenette on this next question. In the criminal legal system, the issue is one of overrepresentation, as Black women account for the most rapidly growing incarcerated population in America. How do the intersecting identities of race and gender make Black women particularly vulnerable to prejudice and punishment in the court and prison systems? And then, you know, what after that? Well, you know what? That's a big enough question. Let's talk about Black women and, you know, being a growing number in the system and how you deal with that.
Well, we can not just limit it to the criminal legal system, but in general, there's this belief that Black women don't feel pain. We're ignored in so many different ways when it comes to our needs. And the same exists in the courtroom. I had a particular case where a client was found guilty and we were at sentencing, and she was no more than, I would say, 23 years old. And the prosecutor, out of his own mouth, said that she was a lost cause. And I'm just like, this is a 20-year-old child, because she was younger than me. How can you say someone is a lost cause at 23? But I've also had some white men that were in their 50s that had more of a significant criminal history than her, and I never heard anyone call them a lost cause. So that's just one example of what happens in the courtroom, not just where I am, because people want to think, oh, I'm in middle of nowhere, Podunk, Florida, it must be like that there. No, it's like that in the big cities too. I have friends in New York. I have friends in Miami. I have friends in Chicago that are public defenders or private criminal defense attorneys. And it's just one of those things where if you're Black, whether it be male or female, but specifically when it comes to females, like I've had pregnant clients and I'm asking that their bond reduction happen, or I don't want to see my client have their baby in the jail, but those things were ignored, versus someone else, a white woman that may be pregnant, they get a private attorney and all of a sudden they get a bond and they have way more charges than my Black pregnant female client. So those are just some concrete examples that I've seen in my 5 years of what's happened when it comes to women in the criminal legal system.
And so just to stay with that for 1 second. So when you're in that moment and a judge says, well, a 23-year-old is a lost cause and you're the public defender, what can you do in that moment? Like, you obviously can't say, well, judge, I just saw you give, you know, a 50-year-old man a light sentence, because that's just going to exacerbate the judge and could make things possibly worse for your client. So how do we begin as public defenders to overcome all these biases that are not only race related, but are also gender impacted?
Well, I actually do call the judge out, because I mean, it may not be a professional saying, but I'm about that life. I just am. So I called the judge out on it, and I called the prosecutor. I said, excuse me, your father's a judge, your grandfather's a judge. Hey, prosecutor, I know your brother, your dad, and your mom are judges. You came from a place of privilege. I may not have judges in my family or doctors in my family, but I am aware that I graduated from law school. We were given way more opportunities than she has. So for you to never know what struggle feels like, to say who's a lost cause, that is absolutely disgusting. And yes, I called the judge and I called the prosecutor disgusting, because it was. And no one had anything to say back to me about it, because instead they had to check themselves, look at their heart, because we know the heart is deceitful and desperately wicked. Who can know it? So they had to look at their own hearts and say, well, I didn't mean it like that. I didn't go back and forth about it because the point had been made. So I would encourage other public defenders, you may not have to have my advocacy style, but if you hear something, say something. How else can this continual system of locking people in cages, how can there be a cog in the wheel unless we open up our mouths and be an amplification for our clients that may not be able to know how to say that I'm a human being too, or maybe too afraid to say it.
Wow, that's very, very powerful, Andrenette. Reverend Dr. Michelle, I know you have something to say about that topic and the way women are treated. And so in your work for Why Not Prosper, talk about how you specifically pay attention to Black women and this struggle of when they become a part of the court system.
So I agree with my co-panelist here, Ms. Sullivan, is that we got to speak up, we got to say something, and we have to teach them how to speak up and say something right in the moment. It's nothing about it being ignorant or disrespectful. The hard conversations need to be had, period, cut and dry. I sit with a lot of government in Philly around a policy, and I be like, this is discriminatory from the beginning, from the start. And so I say we need to change these policies. This is why the jail is filled with Black and brown women. 89%, 94% is women and Black. And what I do is I train up the women and let them be the voice. And not only me, but 100 other women that's formerly incarcerated will show up where we need to show up and let them know that we matter, we count, we want our voices heard. I feel like no city official or government should not be making any policies or anything without somebody with lived experience at that table. Most of them that's making those decisions are so far from the problem. Like my sister was saying about they don't have a idea what struggle is. I'll give you an example. The other day I was on a panel with parole and probation, and we know 71% of the people that go back to jail is violators, right? And they keep going back and they violate because you got these hard restrictions, like if they move and change their address, you lock them back up. Okay, you give them a lock them back up because their urine is hot. They don't need incarceration. They might need treatment, right? And so I'm like, we just need to look at these policies. Then they drop a detainer on them once they lock them back up, which is costing the states, the counties, the cities more money. So, what risk assessment tool are y'all using to determine when a detainer gets dropped? So all of that stuff, I'm like, we need to go back to the drawing board, right back to the beginning, because this is the day in the season that it just needs to change, because it's white anti-racism from the door. You understand?
Right. Well, from the institution itself is set up that way, right? Years before. Right. Yeah. And how has that, Raj, I'm coming to you because I really want to get to how, we can see the advocacy going on in the nonprofit world and as a public defender, and I want to hear about it corporate wise. But before I move to that, I just want to ask the two other panelists, how has it changed, or better or worse, since COVID?
Well, the COVID for me just opened up the disparities like even more, right? For our population. And I want to stroke our public defenders in Philly. Our chief defender is Kara Bradford, and she works so hard, putting in thousands of petitions to get the people out of jail, make the police stop locking people up during COVID. So we had a season during COVID where the jails went down from a 900 census to 200, which was really good. But then George Floyd got killed and the looting started and they filled them back up. Wow. So COVID, we got a mandate from our governor, one, two, the public defenders worked tirelessly. So we had that season. So COVID really has just exposed, for the lack of better words, or just showed the disparities more glaring,
Yeah.
If that makes
And Andrenette, has COVID helped or hurt with like sentencing or with, you know, tell me about that.
For me, it's helped. More judges are willing to give lower bonds or release people straight pretrial. The bonds aren't as high, especially with women. I found in my jurisdiction, people are more likely to bond out women than they are men, no matter how much the bond is, as long as they're eligible for it, for my particular clients. But at the same time, sometimes I don't know if it's just COVID or the fact that they're familiar with me and other co-workers that are strong advocates and they just don't want to hear our mouths. So they go ahead and they rule in our favor. But either way, it works because I'm not the only one in my office that really pushes for true reform. So it just could be a mixture of both for me.
Yeah. Raj, the underrepresentation of Black women in corporate spaces, you know, I mean, you know, Roz Brewer being like the first CEO of a Fortune 500 company in 2021, what kind of pressure does that put on you as a Black woman to, you know, to advance the causes inside? And what are some of those things that you've been able to do?
Yeah, and I get asked this question a lot. And I think what I've reconciled is it's what my ancestors would have wanted me to do. And it's like, that's my job. That's my destiny to do that. I was asked a question. I was on a Black History Month panel at work, and we started off the panel talking about our names. And my full name is Rajoielle. I never really go by that. My parents and my siblings call me by my full name. And one of the things I recognized was like, oh, I'm the only Rajoielle. And I've often been the only person in the room for a lot of my life. I was the only Black female, only Black person in mechanical engineering when I graduated from undergrad. I was the only Black female in my master's of engineering class. I was the only Black female when I started my program at Duke in Germany. And so what that did was it set the stage for me being comfortable with who I am, what I represent, but then also challenging the system to make sure that the next time there's not an only one. So what can I do to influence through recruiting efforts, through mentorship? I make myself available. Like, it's a very rare occasion that I tell someone no, especially another Black female, if they want to meet, if they need guidance. But also, like, when I'm in the room and I have a seat at the table, what am I doing to like scoot over and make sure that there's another seat? What am I doing to open the door? What am I doing? Like Dr. Reverend Michelle talked about, is like, she has 100 women showing up. So what am I doing to make sure that I'm challenging the system? So I'm bringing people along. It's not a great feeling being the only one, but what I am doing is challenging that bias of, why is there only one person? What are we doing for succession plans? When we're interviewing, who's in the room? Who's being invited to interview? What are those things that we're so comfortable with doing that we now have to be uncomfortable? And then asking those questions. Well, why was this person not selected? Why was this person not granted an interview? When we're going out recruiting on campuses, why are our stipulations so strict that we can't open things up to allow a more diverse background? Those are the things that I can do to change. And it's not always fun, but at the same time, that's why I'm here. And I have to continue to do that work. I have to continue to challenge, raise my hand. And if I'm tired, so what? I have to show up, because if I don't, the world's not going to change. The opportunities won't continue to come. And it's not always fun, but it's also something that I strongly believe that if all of us that are sitting here on this panel, if we aren't a part of the change we wish to see, the world won't change at all.
That's right.
And so challenging the judge when they're saying ridiculous things, or if I'm in a people meeting and we're talking about performance reviews, challenging why discriminatory things are being said, like not being quiet, make people uncomfortable to make discriminatory jokes around me, making sure that the respect is there. But then in opportunities like this, show up and, you know, make sure that I'm representing. Or if I have an opportunity to, you know, if I'm doing a marketing campaign And, you know, I need to make sure that how we Black women show up on camera and is representative of a celebration and not some sort of, you know, stereotype or bias. I was a part of an initiative that we had called Free the Work. And basically what that was is how do we not only create something in front of the camera that we're proud of and that Black women and people in general, or Hispanic or people of color, they want to see, but what's happening behind the camera? So I would get on set early on in my career and I would get there and it's like, we have this African-American campaign, but there's a person of color behind the camera. I'll just leave it at that. So what are the things that we can do to change that? And so I was really, you know, proud that as a company, we became a founding member of Free the Work. So we can find underrepresented creatives. So for the first time last year, we had a Black woman shooting and directing a tier 1 automotive campaign. That was the first time, to my knowledge, in the history of Ford Motor Company that we were able to do something. To me, that kind of stuff matters. Those are the things that you can do. And I guess what? Next time she puts her portfolio in front of another automotive company, she'll have that experience, because that's always our excuse. They don't have the experience. So that's the things that we can do. If they don't have the experience in that particular realm, does not mean that they are not capable and they're not the best person for the job. So those are the types of things that I try to do, you know, on a regular basis, and, you know, take a step back and just make sure that I'm being intentional, and it's not for self, for the betterment of our community. And, you know, just ensuring that, you know, I'm a part of history. That's all I can, you know, hope for every day is like, did I help change history? It takes one voice.
One at a time, girl, one at a time. I think as Black women, you know, there's not a day that we're not living in the lens of, you know, gender and race at the same time, you know, every time we walk through a door. And I thought a lot about what you said about your name. And, you know, obviously I was not born Mo. And my first name is pronounced Moraima. And I have a Hispanic mother and an African-American father. And many times when I get on a meeting, most people think I'm a man because my name is Mo. And they can't figure out the Ivory, so they have no sense of what the racial component is going to be. And so then, surprised, here I am showing up in the store or on the conversation or, you know, whatever it is. And so I deal with that, you know, every day. And you know, it's been it's a door opener and a conversation opener, but you do also deal with like why you had to do that in the first place. And I shortened my name because of how much my name was mispronounced and how tired I got of explaining how to say it, and how many people just couldn't and really didn't want to take the effort that it took to learn how to say it correctly. And so I think we make so many concessions, you know, all the time in our lives, you know, because of the gender and race lens that we're always, you know, living through. And as an educator, as a law professor, you know, I try to bring that into the classroom as much as I can, because if there's ever an industry that is slow to move and unwilling to look through the lens of race and gender, it is the law. And I think Andrenette would agree with that. And I'm 100% sure the Reverend Doctor agrees with that as well. And so it is up to us to bring into these settings, corporate America, higher education, all of these places, our own experiences that then allow people to see that there are so many different shades of us and views of us and you know, mouthpieces of the culture, really, that are just so varied. And so I just applaud, especially since it is March and it is Women's Month, I just applaud everybody for, you know, bringing that lens of race and gender into your work every single day, because just in 30 minutes, I've discovered how fabulous you all are. And I'm just really grateful to be here. So Reverend Dr. Michelle, I want to go to you and your experience in the nonprofit world, and especially around the Black Lives Matter movement and the events of 2020 and how that's affected your work in the nonprofit space. Like, you talked a little bit about, like, you know, there was COVID and then there was George Floyd, right? And the things that happened in Philadelphia. Tell me how the movement has affected your work in your space.
So for me, I feel like Black Lives Matter have really been the catalyst to open up new funding streams, right? Because right, you know, George Floyd really was televised of racism, right? They could not no longer say it wasn't happened. This story has been televised, a live murder, and everybody's seen it. And what Black Lives Matter did was put a spotlight on it. And then people who had the ability to give or guilt, I always don't know which one, right? Started opening up their pockets, and then Black Lives Matter signs went on everybody's lawn. And I'm not really sure which really ones is do they really believe Black Lives Matter?
Well, are they protecting themselves? Yeah, are they protecting themselves?
Yes. Yeah, because I'm gonna tell you, I must have about 4 or 5 funders call and say, one lady from from London, and another company all the way from Minnesota or somewhere, and they was like, "Hey, you Reverend Doctor?" And I was like, "Yes." And they was like, "Oh, can you send us your paperwork?" And I said, "Sure." And they said, "We want to give you a grant." And I said, "Oh, that's wonderful. Praise the Lord." And you know, and I said, "Well, how'd you find me?" They said, "Oh, we just have to diversify our books." Okay. And so it's been, I can't tell you, probably about 4, and one foundation was very large. It was like $50,000, and they had never heard of me. They wasn't in this city, and they had just went on. So I think all of that started to catapult because of the Black Lives Matter movement. One foundation
Did you take money? Did you take?
Yeah, I got the money. Yes,
okay,
absolutely.
Okay,
and I called the lady. Because they said, "Send me your paperwork," and I sent the paperwork. And I said, "Okay," I sent the paperwork. I said, "But you know," and then an hour later, I got an email saying, "We're going to give you $50,000." And I was like, "This is wonderful." And I still don't know who they are. I don't know where they from. And I said, "Miss, I sent you all my paperwork, but can I ask one question? Where'd you get my name from? Where'd you find out?" She said, "Well, some consultants, some of our counterparts, Caucasian consultants, was looking for programs with reentry and justice, and Why Not Prosper came up." So that was a blessing. I think like Black Lives Matter started got people looking and searching. That's one good reason right there, how it has supported us, right? And then Black Lives Matter, I think, pulled the Black community together. We were siloed, right? And so we was working over here on this project and working over there on that project. But the Black Lives Matter movement started us marching and protesting in a unity. So those are the 2 things I felt like kind of support nonprofits and Black Lives Matter, how we could connect.
Has there been any negativity around it? Like any pushback, any, threats, anything, has it also had any kind of opposite effect of, we know that it's ignited a climate in our country that has created an entire nationalist movement. Have you experienced any of that?
No, I haven't experienced anything negative because I don't give off nothing negative, and I have to aura that, like, don't bring that to me, please, ma'am. Sir. Okay, so I don't get that. I don't get it. And if they want to give it, when I open my mouth, it kind of regress, right? So I don't get that, even if people are thinking that, and and so I haven't gotten any negative impacts from it. My thing where I'm working with now is like having my voice, but not coming off like an angry Black person, like an angry Black woman. I want to just get that balance, because I mean what I say and I say what I mean, and this stuff needs to change. But me personally, I could have a way of backing somebody up against the wall, right? So I'm just trying to say, Rev, let them up a little bit, let them breathe. And so Black Lives Matter had gave me, I always had this voice anyway. I wanted to be a judge when I was 12, but I went to jails, and I was like, I ain't gonna never get that seat. But Black Lives Matter allows us to speak up, come together, and no negative effects for me. Only thing, I think some of the white people are hiding behind the sign, which I already said that.
Yeah. And listen, I just, because that phrase angry Black woman sends like a thing through my body, because it's such a stereotype, beside the fact we do have a lot of things to be angry about just off the bat. But that's just a myth for us understanding and asserting our power, right? Oh, she's so angry, so you could, if you want to be at all angry on this conversation, just go right ahead, free permission. But I just want to say that this that title bothers me so much, because when we begin to defend ourselves and speak up, we get that as a way to push down what we're saying. And that I know happens to Andrenette in the courtroom. So I'm going to ask, what does Black Lives Matter uprising done inside of the courtroom for you?
Well, it's been a slow build. I remember when one of my very, very, very close friends at my job had a trial. I think it was back in 2017 or 2018, and it was a battery on law enforcement. And she asked questions about playing the line. She asked questions about Black Lives Matter, and it was so much pushback, and the judge wanted to silence her, and it just was this whole crazy thing just to pick a jury. Versus when I had a battery on law enforcement trial in 2019, I actually was able to win, because there's been this progression, kind of like in the civil rights movement itself, more exposure, where more people see what's really going on. Then they can't, unless they choose to, stay in their bubble, in their conceited mindset that police brutality does not happen. So I was able to win my trial. And then even I've had some COVID trials, and one where I was asserting that an officer was lying, and he claims that my client confessed, and I was still able to get a not guilty because of what happened with Mr. Floyd. It's just like the few people that wanted to say this does not exist can no longer say that. Because when Black Lives Matter first started, I live in a place where business owners have Confederate flags in their windows and in their yards. Like my neighbors, my mother is here visiting me, and we walk the neighborhood. My neighbors have huge Confederate flags in their garages. Even some of our clients, one of the first investigations I did had a whole Confederate flag blanket. And I'm just like, where am I? Take me back to Memphis, take me back to New York. Like, I was just like, so that's the climate that I'm in. So to go from that to be able to win battery on law enforcement cases, to actually have the jury to be open to the fact that law enforcement officers, some of them don't tell the truth. That is a major thing for a place where I live. However, at the same time, you know, you have to, there's a line, because some people just don't want to believe it. They're going to pick law enforcement no matter what, but they've been educated on what to say during jury selection. So you have to be more cunning and pry even more to really see what's the root of who you are. So there's other questions that we have to ask. What bumper sticker do you have? What kind of signs do you have in your yard? Like, what organizations are you a part of? Those are the things that we have to ask, because they're not going to straight out and say anymore that Black lives don't matter, regardless if they feel that way. And the same with the judges. There's ways that you can educate judges now, or prosecutors now, that you may not have been able to in the past, because their ears were just so close to it and their eyes were close to it.
Yeah. I know, Raj, I'm going to come to you next. I know in the education world, because we were virtual when Black Lives Matter started becoming, you know, just something that was a news story every single night. And then the yellow, you know, on Pennsylvania Avenue in DC, and then here in Atlanta we had that, and I know cities across the country. It really forced a conversation from the highest levels of the institution that I teach at to say students might need to talk about this. You know, we may need to stop things and allow students to talk about this in its relationship to the law. And so I teach a course called Hip Hop and the Law, and so I absolutely have to stop to talk about the relationship of hip hop culture to the Black Lives Matter movement. And I have to stop and talk about how entertainers, and particularly rappers, are expressing themselves through their political choice of lyrics, and their coming out and bringing crowds and crowds of people with them through the base that they have. And so hip hop culture is just bumping up parallel to Black Lives Matter movement, because it is a part of who we are. It's a part of who a lot of white Americans are, whether or not that is the way that it is portrayed. Hip hop culture, hip hop music, genre is the most bought and the most consumed in America. So it has an impact completely when those messages are being discussed. So I was just very glad and absolutely grateful to my institution for embracing that this was a conversation that needed to happen, whether it was virtual or whether we decided to mask up and get together and do it outside, but we did that. And that is what the idea of being able to express the truth and the reality of what is going on in society, and Black Lives Matter allowed that, and I was truly grateful for it. And so, Raj, in a corporate setting, when these things were going on, was there any attention paid to the forces around, even though everybody was working in a virtual environment?
Yeah, I would say this was the first time in my career outside of maybe I want to say like 9/11 that forced the issue. So for me, like my initial thoughts of, the George Floyd tragedy was the heaviness of still having to show up. And one thing I can appreciate was my executive leadership team. I had many of them reaching out, like privately, like, Raj, how do you feel?
Yeah.
And what do you think we can do? And will you be a part of the conversation that we all need to have? Like, help educate us. And so my agreement was, yeah, I will help, but I'm not the problem and the solution. So this is a conversation that allies and advocates like you need to have. And for those that don't want to speak, like, don't use me as like the voice of whatever it is that's going on. I can be supportive, but this isn't now my problem to take on. And I was like very appreciative of how our executive team handled it. And then on top of that, it was, let's not rush out to make like a statement and make like some marketing campaign that we really can't stand up to.
Yeah.
So what are the things that we can do silently, not silence, but silently acknowledge? So there was, in partnership with the UAW, which is the United Auto Workers, the plants were shut down for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. But then also there was a week of understanding, DEI basically, to have a ton of conversations all day long. And there were advocates, there were allies, there were people like me on panels. And I told the story of me getting pulled over. And I didn't tell that story to very many people. And the fact that I had a platform to say, this is what happened to me. You see Raj as this person, executive, she's doing great, on and on. But no, this happened to me.
Yeah.
In a company vehicle, and I'm Black. So it level set things. Yeah, so it's like, now you have to see me. Right. So it doesn't matter how you think I speak or how I dress or what you believe I do. At the end of the day, I'm still a Black woman. And from my perspective, I also wanted to make sure that whatever it was that I did and I participated in was going to help change things, so that if my daughter ever wanted to come forward, I would be proud of her following my footsteps. But then also being very like direct with her. She at the time was 12, having her be a part of the conversation, letting her watch the news, helping her understand, like, this is what's going on. I mean, it freaked me out when I saw the video like everyone else, but then it dawned on me, and I know this already, but I have a Black son, he's 6. And so I'm like, that could very easily in 20 years be my son.
Absolutely.
And it was so scary and so frightening for me that I felt like I have to still express this. Can I change things? 100% no. So I'm not going to shy away from it, but I can, be vulnerable enough, which is not something that I was normally used to doing, so people can really understand. And I would say from then on, there's been multiple conversations. I'm a part of some things that we're doing on a regular basis to make sure that we are addressing some of the, inequities that are, happening consciously or unconsciously. But that's part of the work that I talked about earlier, is like, okay, I want to be a part of the conversation. I don't have to be the conversation, but what are the things that I can do to try help influence? But then also try to identify people that will be advocates. There's a lot of white men that are now like raising their hand saying, I want to advocate. And my thing is like, you are not a hero. You're doing what is right.
That's right.
Right? You are leveling the playing field so that people have an equal opportunity to just participate. I want a chance to interview, right? You don't have to hand me a job. Let me show that I'm capable. And then when I get there, let me knock it out the park. Then you're going to see. Like Bruno Mars, don't believe me, just watch. That's what I'm looking for. You don't have to hand us anything. Many of us have, the Black woman is more educated than any other cohort. Like, like we're prepared. We're out here. Give us a chance. Not give us a chance, give me an opportunity to show you what I'm capable of. So that's been my world over the last year. And it's been emotional, but in my mind, I'm like, this is the impact that's necessary, you know, and I don't think it's going to be a short-term thing. There's a lot of things that we're working on that will, you know, be a part of the culture moving forward.
Raj, thank you for sharing that. And that's that good work, whether silent or out loud in some marketing campaign. If it's moving the needle, then it's important work. And I'm glad you're sharing that. I cannot believe that we've been on for 45 minutes now. And so we are going to begin to wrap this up. And I wanted to just go one by one to ask, you know, if you could give any advice to young Black women that are listening right now, who are entering your industry or just dealing with, you know, being young and coming into this into their respective lives, what would that be? And we will start with Reverend Dr. Michelle.
Okay, so my advice to young professionals, entrepreneurs coming into the field is, number one for me is be grounded in who you are. Be grounded in who you are. If you're spiritual, be grounded in God. You understand, because I don't leave my house without connecting with the God of my understanding. I'm not going out to fight nobody, stand for nobody. I got to stand for me first. And I think we get wore out, we burn out. So that would be first, right? To be grounded, stay grounded. Next, I would say to them to get a mentor, get somebody you look up to. There's this saying that was told to me that if you're the smartest person in your circle, you need to switch circles. You know, so always be hanging out with people you know, aspire to be like, or do it, not even be like really doing things, you know, and have an impact on the world. So those would be the two things. I probably could get another couple things, but those I think are the most important, because we need support. We need somebody strong and grounded in their faith and in who they are. You first, and then you could extend yourself out into the world.
Thank you. Andrenette, go ahead.
I ditto what Dr. Simmons said. I also would say to own who you are, own your voice. We spoke about earlier about the whole angry Black woman thing. I don't care what you call me. You will not silence me. We've been silenced long enough. So if you know, if you have your motions prepared and your law prepared and your arguments prepared in the courtroom, say it. If you're not in the courtroom and you're in a social setting and you know that what you're saying isn't true fact, say it. If they want to call you angry, who cares? At the end of the day, you said what you needed to say so that you can have a clear mind and a clear conscience and a clear heart. Because we as women and we as Black women have been silenced and manipulated for too long. And I'm not here for it, and they shouldn't either. Another thing I would say is, just because it hasn't been done before doesn't mean that you can't do it. We are innovative people as Black people, and we trailblaze, not on purpose sometimes, just because it just is what it is. God puts ideas in our minds and in our hearts that have never existed before. So like Dr. Simmons said, find the mentor, find people, find allies. It doesn't just have to be Black people that are going to support you and to help to groom you, but because if it hasn't been done before, that's why you're here, because each and every one of us are an answer to a problem. So be that answer, and don't be afraid to step forward just because it hasn't been done before.
That's great advice. Raj?
Gosh, I'm so inspired by both of you in so many ways. So I just want to thank you both for like the transparency. I'll always love like meeting, you know, new women. The thing for me, and a lot of it you guys have said, so I agree with that. So I'll try to add to it. there's one thing that as Black women, like, we don't always have the courage to show what we're capable of. Like we put our heads down and we have this thing of like almost being apologetic for how great we are. And so my advice to, you know, the younger generations is be like unapologetic about your God-given talent. And for me, it's like when you take your God-given talent with ambition, nobody can stop you. That's what makes you limitless. That's what makes you unstoppable. And so, you know, people always talk about like, oh, she broke glass ceilings. Like, I don't believe in that. That's an imaginary barrier that we set for ourselves. You can't connect the dots looking forward. Meaning if I have to plan every single thing before I'm going to take a step forward, that's not life. How I got here today, I would not have known that that was the path. But being unapologetic, like even Dr. Reverend Michelle said, like, I call it a mastermind. Like, who's in my circle? If you the Beyonce of your crew, get a new crew, right? Because if you that much better and greater, no, you have to be like pushing each other. And if you haven't read Think and Grow Rich, I would definitely recommend that because it talks about that mastermind, like the unimaginable, and have those people that'll hold you accountable. And lastly, just, you know, I'm a very intention-based person. So when you have a goal, like what's your true intention? Is it for self-gratification? Is it to help someone else? Is it to better your community? But what's the intention? And don't do things because it's what everyone else believes you should be doing. You know, it's like there's the times where you're in school or you're, you know, in a job and someone is like, oh, you would be a great such and such. Well, is that aligned with your purposes? Maybe it's not, you know, so it's like, trust your gut. You know, I feel like intuition is God's voice, and that's what I listen to. So regardless of all the noise in the system, it's like, what is God's voice telling me? What's my intuition? And, you know, my prayer is always like, God, give me the clarity and discernment to know the difference between an open door and a closed one.
Yes, absolutely. I would just add that I think everybody should spend time identifying what their core skill sets are and then work at perfecting them. It will take you to any industry that you want to be in. If you have core skill sets that you know and you have perfected, and you can work in the law, you can work in media, you can work in entertainment, you could build houses if you felt like it, because those core skill sets will take you everywhere that you want to go. So identify them and then work hard at perfecting them. And that's the advice that I want to give. And so I want to just go around real quick and everybody give your social media handles so that everybody can follow us. Mine is Mo Ivory Show on IG and Mo Ivory everywhere else. Andrenette, what's yours?
My Instagram is at Nette, Nette Sullivan, Sullivan. Everything else is Andrenette Sullivan, whether it's Facebook or LinkedIn, or my Twitter is also at Nette Sullivan.
Great. And Dr. Reverend Michelle?
I would just offer them to go to the Why Not Prosper website. I'm not the social media one, but everything I know and do is on that website. All right. I have my experience with the social media and I choose to stay off. But for this, whynotprosper.org will get you any information about Why Not Prosper, me, or our actions and advocacy work.
Great. And Raj, go ahead.
Since I have the pleasure of being the only Rajoielle, I'll spell my name and you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. So it's Rajoielle. So Instagram is at Rajoielle, Twitter is at Rajoielle, LinkedIn, Rajoielle Register.
Awesome. And so we came together tonight for a wonderful organization, Gideon's Promise, who works to strengthen public defenders and transform public defense, and that work is so important, and we need your support at Gideon's Promise. So please visit gideonspromise.org to volunteer, to send checks, to support, because when we strengthen public defenders and we transform public defense, we strengthen our community, both for Black women, for Black men, for all people of color. So I would invite everybody to please go to gideonspromise.org. And I just want to say thank you so much to everybody who joined. You three are the dream of Gideon's Promise. And Andrenette, you are I just want to jump in there and hug you like you're my little love baby. Because I see you in those courtrooms doing the work, and this is exactly what Gideon's Promise raised you up to be, and to go out there and transform communities. And Raj, you're making a difference inside a place where not many of us get to sit, and not many of us get to have a seat at the table, and you do. And Reverend Dr. Michelle Simmons, you are the example of it all, right? You are the experienced woman who has been on the one side and then came out to work to advocate for those that had that same experience. And we pray for you and we bless you in your work at Why Not Prosper. And so I just want to give a kiss out to everybody tonight and say thank you so much for joining us, and happy Women's History Month. And we're so grateful to Gideon's Promise for pulling this conversation together tonight. And if anybody has any questions, again, please go to gideonspromise.org and you can get your questions answered there. So everybody have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for joining us, and the work continues.